Welcome to Unbound. You're here for conscious chats that go deeper than your Instagram feed, where we ditch the dogma but keep it real. So let's get unbound. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, Georgia.
Let's get unbound on religion and modern spirituality.
Great.
Yeah.
Because it feels like a lot of things. One, it feels like there can be a rub. Like there can be a question of, can you have both at once, or should you have both at once? Can you be, can you be active, practicing Christian, going to church, and also hold spiritual beliefs at the same time?
Or wider spiritual beliefs, let's say.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're at an interesting juncture where I think there is this shift where people are starting to have questions about religion in lots of different ways. You know, there's lots of pieces that I do resonate with, and there's also potentially lots of pieces that I don't resonate with. And that can be kind of a challenging moment to come to when you've spent so much time in those settings, or you've had, you know, real experiences. And with teaching meditation, I've seen a range of people come through, all different religions, non-religious, whatever it might be. And so, of course, you can practice meditation, which is a spiritual practice. It doesn't have to be that, but we're going to kind of tie back to what spirituality really is in this episode, because there's so much preconception, stereotypes about even what spirituality is. And if we come back to the baseline of what it really is, it's essence. It's the essence of you. It's a direct connection within yourself, within consciousness. And so that is important for all people. What meaning they make of that and what they consider to be the best pathway to it and how that expresses can vary wildly. But I think one thing that is really missing in today's society is real, genuine connection. So, you know, there's this piece, this schism where it's hard to sometimes put all the pieces together. And so I see people coming in and sometimes they've completely rejected, you know, their religious upbringing because they feel that it really doesn't align with where they are now, and there's certain aspects of it that they've found concerning in different ways, because of course we've seen lots of things be done throughout history of humankind in the name of religion, which I think a lot of those things people generally now don't align with. And what the purpose of religion really is, religare, means to bind back to source. So that should be what's happening. Now, some of that may be happening to various degrees. You know, we're just talking about technologies ultimately. Spirituality, pathways, spiritual pathways, religion, they are all ultimately meant to be pathways back to the one same thing. There's only one thing at the basis of everything. There's not, you know, the sky is not blue and also green and sometimes, you know, purple, unless we're talking about sunsets and sunrises. You know, there is only one sky, there is only one baseline. So we're talking about lenses into that. And where humanity has got to is this mistaken egoic thinking where the spiritualized ego comes into play, where it's like, my religion is the best religion, and anyone else that's not practicing that, you know, is lesser or potentially needs to be killed off in some senses, which we've seen happen. This idea that we have to, as humans, which comes from the ego getting involved, we have to make divisions, make comparisons, make one better, one less in order to find one's place in the world. And that is all coming from the ego. So the big problem, which is missing from a lot of practices, is transcending the ego, is stepping beyond that, is having practices and techniques that take the mind beyond the ego so that it doesn't start running the show, and being very, very conscious and aware of where that is coming into play, because there can be beautiful original teachings. You know, Jesus's teachings, for example, are very beautiful and they're very aligned with, for example, the Vedic worldview or the unified field of oneness, which is expounded in the Veda. Jesus said, I am the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, which really marries up with this 3-in-1 concept that comes through the Vedas, which I am the source, I am that baseline layer of unboundedness. And I'm also the Son. He was talking about himself, and again in masculine terms, because that was the relevant way to express things at the time, and he was a man, though this, particularly within the Vedic tradition, is not in any way limited to just men, but that's the way he expressed it at the time, which is I'm also the Son, so I'm this body, I'm this relative body level experience, and I'm the Holy Spirit, which is I am that subtle layer, the divine layer. So I'm all of those things at once. That's the full range and depth of consciousness, which gets described in the Vedas, in those Eastern wisdom traditions, as being the 3-in-1 experience and having source value, relative, and then subtle value online. So these teachings, when we can find that unifying point, which is the piece that I find very satisfying, is finding the unity, not finding the division.
But sorry, I've got to jump in because this, and I think I'm just, because in essence what you're saying, I'm like, this makes total sense.
Yes.
And I can see and I can feel how those teachings align with, what we have learned from your teachings of the Vedas, and how it would align with Christianity, for example. But that's not been my lived experience, and it's probably a similar thing for other people, because when you talk about the teaching of Jesus being I'm the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, well, he was, but then we are too, right?
Yes.
But that's not like how it feels when you're getting taught it. I'm thinking about my upbringing.
So where I'm getting to with that is that essentially at the baseline, when we get to the purest part of the teachings, there is unity and it all marries up. And Jesus also said, the kingdom of heaven is within. That's what he was encouraging people to find, right? But what we get left with when we have a great master, which Jesus was, that then passes away, we get left with who is left and what state of consciousness are they in, and how do they interpret the teachings. And then this trickles down and down and down and down. So we have a great master in a particular state of consciousness, profound state of consciousness, Jesus Christ. But then after that, I think the mistake is often made is that the interpretations, which a lot of the Bible is interpretations. It's Paul's interpretation. It's the Gospels are interpretation, and the actual amount of what Jesus himself specifically said is very limited. So over time, some of that can get diluted, and we have cultural influences like patriarchy, which is heavily evident in the church, where, women were suppressed. They weren't allowed to, in many cases, be in a high spiritual position within the church. Mary's gospel, suppressed Mary's gospel, is very beautiful. One of the more unified ones that has that more unified value to the teaching that was hidden. There is so much that occurs over time which really isn't the original pure teaching. And then we come to the fact of we have to be able to discern whenever we're receiving anything, how much does it resonate with us personally, because that is your best radar of what feels on for you and what doesn't feel on. And when we're hearing something, a teaching from any person, from any guru, any master, any teacher, any priest, whoever it might be, it's still, what is the quality of that channel? What is the state of consciousness of the person sharing that knowledge? Because they also, how much are they practicing? What are their techniques? What's the quality of that technology? Is it giving them the capacity to be a pure channel for that wisdom? And when it's really pure, it just lands naturally, and there's no part of it that makes you feel like, oh, that's that twangy feeling that you get like, I don't know about that. But when the power dynamics start to come into play, when we're not accessing our own innate creative potential, when we're not clearing stress so that we have that inner clarity, then it's very easy for us to be able to get indoctrinated. And it gets very seductive because we can have a really powerful experience at a particular point in time. And then we get stuck into that, well, now everything that anyone says in terms of the, controlling behaviors, which we've seen from both church, gurus, masters, across the board, cults, when it gets into that point, well, then all of this then must be on because I'm having these experiences. So that is the kind of danger point where people can get to if they're not really cultivating their own consciousness and being aware of what power dynamics might be at play and what their own traumas are, if those also haven't been cleared and aren't really being made aware and brought to light, then there's this chance for that person to more easily be drawn into dynamics that maybe aren't healthy around these spaces.
So I can only speak from my experience. We were a bit of a box ticking family when it came to Christianity. We might be there at Christmas potentially. We were there at Sunday school because it was free babysitting. Maybe there was Easter. I ended up going to an Anglican school just because of the school, not because the religious aspect was seen as particularly important. But that was my main exposure to Christianity, but there was never at any point any teaching about going inward ourselves or clearing things ourselves. It was like you get your sense of, wisdom, you get your teaching, your knowledge, your sort of relief or release from the troubles in your life, but only when you attend this place or listen to this person or say these things. And it was quite like externalized in terms of like, well, you'll get, what you need in that sense, but only from here, not going inwards and finding that in yourself. And I think that was a really big rift, that was a rub, because it was like, well, but none of that is resonating with me. That's not landing with me because I can't feel the resonance of that sense of you need to come here and be in this place and listen to this person and say these things and believe this stuff and this is the right direction. There was no, practice. There was no tool along with that. Originally, was that different?
Well, there are some theories that Jesus was teaching something called the Great Mystery, which was a practice he was giving to his advanced students, his disciples, that sort of got lost along the way. We can't really be sure. I'm not sure if that's been validated. It's all happening a long time ago. Very little historical record. But I think, to your point, there's a couple of kind of problems there. The school system, the religious school system, which I also attended, went to, I think, an Anglican church, and many, many people have had that. And that is sometimes the reason why they've actually been put off any kind of religion. I'm not promoting religion anyway. I'm just saying this is the mechanics of kind of what's gone on, for good, bad, or otherwise. And for others, maybe it drew them in more. But there's this concept of worthy inquiry within the Vedic teachings and within that tradition, which is one only receives knowledge or gets given knowledge from a master or teacher when they're inquiring worthily. So they're really genuinely wanting to hear. And so one of the issues is being kind of forced and frog marched as a child into these settings and singing the songs, and there's no inquiry there. The child is not, in most cases, the child is not really asking for that. It's kind of been laid upon them. And I've heard this even from, Indian friends of mine who have rejected some of their traditions as well, because it was just done, and it was done habitually. And then there's no real explaining of why, and no sort of inner connection or desire in some cases that I've heard that. So that's one of the issues there. The other, I think, that is a missing piece in some settings is that there isn't a technique for releasing stress. So within, for example, Christianity, you've got prayer, which is, really the purpose of that is to kind of open you up to that inner connection and to start to enliven that, which is very beautiful, and you can receive direct wisdom there. But I think many people find that they're not necessarily, that wisdom's not coming back so clearly to them.
Also, I think that they don't express that that's the purpose clearly.
No, the purpose is more described as everything is separate to you. So you're bowing down to something outside of yourself, rather than that final unifying piece of wisdom, which is actually, this is the higher aspect of you. And this is what Jesus was teaching. But some of the deeper meanings have been lost along the way because the technologies weren't there for enlivening that within your own consciousness. So it's very important to have, from my perspective at least, is that there's a self-sufficiency, a self-sufficient practice that you're doing on your own. Now, prayer is a very beautiful practice and has a lot of wonderful benefits to it, but it's not really releasing stress. And that is probably one of the big pieces as well, that because we see a lot of people that are very religious of all kinds, then they're religious over here, and then they're over here saying, well, this group of people and this group of people can't exist, and they're wrong and they're unnatural, and also we need to get rid of all of this over here. In some cases, not all. And I think if you're really having that unified experience, if it's really enlivening inside of you, you can't actually see anything from nature itself, from animals to other humans of any kind of skin bag color. That's all it really is a skin bag that lays over the underlying unified field that is appearing inside of that and manifesting and becoming that form or phenomena. You can't really then see yourself as separate, and you can't have any intention to want to cut off the interests of others, of any other group, of any kind, of any preference, gender preference, sexual preference, race, anything, because you can feel that that person is experiencing the same thing, is actually the same thing inside as you are. So that is clearly not happening enough. I think we can all say that, because that is prevalent worldwide in every kind of setting, almost every kind of setting. So we need the technology to de-excite the physiology and access that unified experience. When that's happening, then we start to see things more clearly. And when I say clearly, I mean see it as it is, which is there is only one thing, one unified field, which is quantum mechanics, quantum physics can tell us that now, which means there's only one thing. Within that unified field exists all form and phenomena, all human beings, all other beings, all divine beings. They're all ultimately one. They're all ultimately you. This is that 3-in-1 experience. But at which layer are you predominantly experiencing? Are you just experiencing from the human layer? Are you experiencing human layer and also that deep unbounded layer, but not yet the divine layer? Opening up to all three. And one is a very advanced experience, but within Eastern wisdom traditions, within the Yoga Vedantic tradition, there is a clear pathway and techniques that enliven that experience within you. Now, the idea that when we have a divine experience, we're going to see a white man with a beard in the sky is also a bit limiting. Firstly, if that is meant to be, a reflection of Jesus's father, Jesus wasn't white. He was brown, quite clearly. So we've culturally changed that over time. Only a man, this male vision. So it's limiting. Even within the Bible, God appeared as a burning bush to Moshe. So the understanding within the Vedic tradition is that God actually is a personal experience. It's a personal experience, and God shows up in the way that's most relevant to that nervous system. And there's a range of what you can experience there, as has been described by many masters and advanced practitioners that have seen, and some with the unity to the experience. I saw this aspect and it showed up like this, and I also saw this aspect, and quite a broad range of how God might appear. And so one of the biggest mistakes we've made is this idea that the way I experience God has to be the way you experience it. And if you're not experiencing it that way, then you're wrong. And you need to go away and potentially do something violent to make that happen. This whole idea that we're taking this, if we're genuinely having that divine experience, also it sort of comes with extreme amount of bliss, extreme amount of satisfaction, supreme satisfaction. There's no need to do anything to anyone else. You don't really care what anyone thinks of that experience, because it's so enriching, so supreme, so divine and graceful on the inner plane that you don't need to enforce it onto others. So again, this is where the spiritualized ego has come into play. And that's why I think one big question is, how can people asked me regularly is how can people be practicing these things and then doing all of this over here? And so these are some of the things where I think that we're missing pieces, which we need to be releasing stress, because if we're not releasing stress, even if we're receiving beautiful wisdom, might be praying, etc., there's still this huge opportunity for us to act from our stress, for the ego to be involved. And then we start to get behaviors that, create separation, that harm others, that are discriminatory, all of those things. Now, that can happen even when you're having that experience, but less likely the more that stress is being released. So, less likely for it to get into those extreme zones, particularly of violence, discrimination, etc.
So if you have one belief system, whether it be Christianity or something else, and you've been brought up to believe that is the one and the right one, and to experience, to have a divine experience, you are going to see or experience this one thing. Like potentially you could be having a divine experience, but because it doesn't look like the thing that you've been told is the right thing, the right divine experience, like you could miss it.
Yes, absolutely. And I've heard that from many people who, I had one student who was telling me about her birth experience, and some woman was saying, how hard it was. And she was like, I felt invincible. And this access that women have in that moment, this matrix opens up and the portal to really access full divine feminine power in that moment. And divine feminine shows up in lots of different forms. She's the most adaptable of all the forms of the divine from the Vedic perspective. So she said, I felt like I was riding a tiger with, I had multiple arms, lots of different weapons in my arms. I was really kind of charging forward. And she had no concept that there is an aspect of the divine called Durga, very fierce divine feminine that shows up in that form. It's been regularly described by many people who've experienced that, though they don't have any need for others to experience that same aspect because they recognize there's others. But she had no idea that was actually, a divine vision. Her own higher divine self is online there, and she got to experience herself as that, which is really, really beautiful. She loved the experience, which is equally fine. We don't need to have an intellectual context for it, but sometimes it's helpful. And she was, really blown away to hear a little bit more deeply about that.
So is there, so silly, but is there room for all of the characters that, people might encounter in spiritual, religious teaching?
I think...
Can anyone turn up, in some consciousness experience, and how is it determined who might turn up for you?
By what's relevant for you in that moment, for your state of consciousness, which can be to do with past life connections. There's even theories about the reincarnation being part of the original Christian teachings, that they were removed over time. So I think reincarnation is a piece, just as I mentioned, that will do a loop on that, is a piece where, particularly in the West, if you've grown up in the more, Western religions where it doesn't appear, which is largely the Christian piece, it is actually not necessarily true that it wasn't originally there in the beginning. So there's lots of evidence now for people to have had multiple lifetimes from, I've remembered past life experiences of my own. I've heard from students that they recall them. I've heard students tell me that, children, their children have said things like, oh, remember when I was your mummy and you were my daughter? And they have had no set up by the parent. They haven't had any discussion of that kind, and they just kind of come out with it. And there are a number of children that have described their past life experience and then kept saying to the parent, very insistent. At younger years, they tend to remember it a bit more, and then the forgetting sort of really sets in. But they'll say, I was flying a plane. My name was John. My co-pilot was such and such, and they could remember it. It was still very vibrant for them. And then a researcher went around trying to match up a series of these stories with historical data, and they were able to match up a lot of them. So, I mean, these were parents just coming forth and saying, my child is insistent about this, and they're just describing something that they've had no context for. Where are they getting it from? It's very detailed. As a parent, when it's just something their fantasy, that their faint fantasy goes away, but they were very insistent. And, there's a fabulous book by a neuroscientist who got pronounced dead on the table and had a whole experience and then actually came back in the body, and he wrote a book, and it was very fascinating that creative intelligence chose him for that role because he'd been very much in the scientific camp with brainstem is dead when the brain shows no activity, life ends, and that's it. He didn't have any kind of spiritual religious beliefs in that setting, just pure science. And then he got shown, no, incorrect. Let's just take you through this experience. And so we'll put in the show notes the link to that book. But that's also a fascinating one. And Many Masters, Many Lives, which is another interesting case of a psychologist who was just working with patients in the normal way that he'd been trained, and then he'd get stuck with some of them and ended up, he got led into a process of them revealing these past life experiences, which were the root cause of their trauma in this lifetime. And so why was that removed? Well, the theory is that at that particular point in time, they felt that humans weren't going to be as controllable if they thought that they had another go around. So if they only have one life, then they really had a lot more control than, I'll sort it out next time. I can come back again, which again is incorrect thinking, because the greatest opportunity is in the lifetime that you have right now for expanding and releasing and moving beyond all that binds you is the idea. But again, we are often taking religion, religious teaching, religious concepts that as we see them now to be what was originally taught, what was originally said, what was the original pure teaching throughout history that's gone through this whole period of iteration through different states of consciousness. It's been, overlaid with some ego here and there, patriarchy, politics, all kinds of things. So what we see now is not necessarily what was the original intention of that. Jesus was for all people. He was a beautiful, unified human that just wanted to heal and love all. So we've probably strayed quite far away from that in some that's gonna happen. Because my co-host and Untidy, Maddie, we had a conversation about how she's started taking her children to church very occasionally. She's not hugely religious, but she wants them to understand why we have certain holidays, what they mean, what they stand for, and, what's the purpose of the church. And in fact, I think she questioned you on feeling inclined to make this decision. Can you remember what that conversation was? If you're looking to go deeper in life and find a tool for greater regulation, I'd highly recommend learning Vedic meditation, which is the foundational practice I've relied on since 2016 and teach full time. It's an effortless practice which uses a particular type of mantra to take the mind beyond thought, rests the body deeper than sleep, and rapidly releases stress. I teach in Aotearoa in Byron Bay in Australia, but can also put you in touch with a local teacher. Reach out via Instagram at GV Meditation or via gvmeditation.com. You'll love it. Yeah, and she meditates as she shared many times on the show. But I think she was trying to grapple with it herself. I meditate, and I also kind of at the moment just feel inclined to take my children to church. What do you think? I was like, great. Obviously, follow fine level of feeling. That is always leading you to the most evolutionary path for you, which is the way it should always be. When we have that inner connection, inner direct intelligence, then we're not reliant on another person. Now, we might seek mentorship, we might seek, advice from time to time, but it should be advice that's validating and lifting up our own inner experience and creating that, giving you a tool that makes you self-sufficient in that regard. So she's like, I feel like, is this at odds with the Vedic wisdom, which I'm also enjoying? I said, no, it all fits, but, maintain your own inner compass around discernment. Discernment's important in those settings. You might listen to some parts of it and think, beautiful, that lands very beautifully with me. Other parts you might be like, that doesn't feel like maybe it's off somewhere. It's not quite the full picture, let's say. But there's so many beautiful aspects around religion, which is gathering in community and having that higher purpose of connection, community in those settings. A lot of great charitable works have been done by religious organizations, and they're well organized to be able to offer that kind of thing as well. And people who really, want to give from the heart, which is really beautifully. And the singing, very important. The opening of the throat chakra, this energy center here, which is one thing that we tend to, as adults, move away from singing very often. Maybe you get one song in the shower now and again. Maybe you sing here and there on the way to work, but you're also stressed and you don't sing so much as you do as a child, because there's always like little sing-alongs and you go to church, and the singing would often happen there at chapel, at school for a lot of people. To be in the singing group, often that was the choir. So that piece is also very enlivening. There's an element of ritual, which is it brings us into a deeper state of presence, because it's all about the senses, what we're seeing, what we're smelling, this offering from the heart of pure devotional offering, which when we've got locked into the intellect, as we have as a society over time, wanting everything to be mental, intellectual, just scientific, it's blocked us off from some of these other beautiful technologies. Again, lots of different rituals come through lots of different traditions, and they all have their own different flavor. But the mechanics, the underlying mechanics are the same, and there is this reciprocity when we think of it from the perspective of, when we have that deeper understanding of, this isn't just about offering something to something outside of myself, which is where the resistance I find often comes. When I take people on pilgrimage to India or on retreat in India and even Bali and other places, and people are making offerings, that can be really jarring for people that have grown up in a Western worldview where offerings mean now I'm bowing or praying to something, and what is that thing, and I don't want to pray to it. But what it's missing is this deeper understanding of the reciprocity, the law of reciprocity, where when one offers from individuality, there is this reciprocity in the field that comes back upon oneself from that higher aspect, the higher version of self, which is a feeling of love and grace. And people find it very enriching until you've had that experience. If you're just watching it from the outside, it looks like, why are they doing all these little things? And it looks kind of like something maybe I wouldn't want to take part in. When I teach Vedic meditation, there is a ceremony at the beginning, because that is our way of honoring the source of this knowledge. When we remove it from its original source by teaching it in the West, instead of cutting out those beautiful pieces, there is a ritual at the beginning. There's a gratitude ceremony, which needs some explaining, because Westerners are like, I feel uncomfortable with this part, which is just a lack of understanding of the mechanics of ritual, what the higher purpose of it is. And there is an openness and a receptivity that it creates, which allows the practice to sink in deeper and be more effective when it's first learned, as well as its benefits and effects and intent to honour the lineage of teachers and the source of the knowledge and all of that. So it's interesting the way even that we feel about ritual, but there's so much that's offered in those spaces. So that is the sad part, is that sometimes we're missing out on all those pieces as well, because of the other pieces that are out of alignment. And I've found, to your earlier question, can you have one set of beliefs and also meditate? Sometimes people say, meditation is evil. I just don't see how, if anything that gives you greater access to your own self on the inside, that releases stress and gives you access to actually experience what the teachings are about, to embody that, how that can be an evil thing. It's a mistake of the intellect. It's a misinterpretation of the teachings. The kingdom of heaven is within. Well, how are you going to experience that within if you're not going inside to awaken the divine layer? That's what that is talking about. So what I've found is people actually are able to connect the parts of the whatever belief system, philosophy of any kind, Buddhism, Christianity, just, conscious philosophy that people are reading online, whatever it is, people have much greater access and connection to it once they're meditating than they did before. So actually, it strengthens that connection. So there shouldn't be any need to have a separation of any kind. You should be able to pull in different technologies that, work for you, that resonate for you based on where your individual soul's pathway is leading you, which again is going to come back to you following that fine level of feeling. What feels charming and inspiring to me? And it may lead you through a series of experiences, traditions, practices that don't align for you, but there's value in that because you've now done the research. I'm not feeling that there. That doesn't work as well as this. I went away from this, but now I'm coming back. Or you go through a series of things and then you really know when something is really working for you because you get there and you've tried other things which really didn't produce the same impact. And then you're like, no, this really is landing. And now I'm really going to dedicate myself to this, which was, similar to how I arrived at Vedic meditation. Was I tried a number of other things before and they just weren't landing at all. The inspiration to continue wasn't there. Whereas when I did this, it was like,
that's the one.
That's it. And here I am, still 9 years later, still practicing it.
And I that was my experience as well. I think throughout life, you end up getting presented with potential paths that could lead you deeper into your relationship with self.
Yes.
And deeper into that connection. But I guess it's one part of it is like, is it the right time maybe? Is this the right path? But it's quite interesting because I remember, first being the first exposure to something like that was Christianity, but also I think when you're with people for whom, you're ticking boxes or this is just part of the culture or the process, they're lacking that deeper understanding of what it can provide and what these activities that you do are kind of there for that sense of unity and connection and gratitude and reciprocity, you don't hear those things getting said, oh, we're going to do this. You might notice this experience. No, you just do the thing. And then I remember going to one Buddhist meeting one time, but there was a sense of this is the right thing to do. This is the right way. And other things are not the right way. That put me off. And then I remember learning Spanish with a private Spanish tutor, and she had a practice and a guru, and she wanted to introduce me to meditation through that. But first she wanted me to agree right there on the spot that I would never eat meat again. and she wouldn't give me any knowledge or practice without me agreeing that I would never eat meat again. And I thought, no, this isn't right either. And then and I kept trying different things. So even though you keep, trying things and then there's, some kind of obstruction to continuing down that road, you still feel, you never get put off kind of feeling inclined to find the thing, because there's some sort of deeper pull that's like, no, I know I need something. I know I need that. There is something deeper and I just can't find the right way to access it. I can't find my entry point. But it's interesting that you do continue to look for it.
Well, you did. And that is common for those that are feeling naturally inspired. And sometimes a lot of that process is unconscious. The pathway, the entry point is, I'm not sleeping. I've just got divorced. Someone in my family has passed away. Or I'm just feeling really, really bad, really, really stressed, and I need to do something. And nature is kind of leading you into the most relevant, the most palatable entry point where you don't realize where you're really going is ultimately into expanding consciousness or becoming more connected. That may not be how you describe what you were even looking for at the time. You didn't really know. You just kind of, maybe you'd say, I was a bit curious, I just wanted to try a couple of things out. But on the higher level, it's a spiritual calling ultimately, which is in all beings, but just depends on the level of maturity and development of that particular soul. So at a particular point in time and in a particular lifetime, which anyone who's listening to this is probably in that lifetime right now, or you won't be listening to this podcast, is that comes online, and it's not coming from individuality. It's a seed that's planted from higher self, from universality, and this is the relevant time for you to be on that pathway, which is again why you can't force another onto that pathway or onto the pathway that you're on, because that may not be relevant for them. So it's a bit like when you learn to meditate and, you just think, ping, 10 people pop into your mind. Oh my God, this would help this person. I can't believe I feel so much better. I'm not less anxious. And here are 10 people in my life that could so benefit from it. But 8 out of those 10 people will have zero interest. And just, the shutters come down if you try and talk about it, because it's not relevant for them right now. Even though, yes, would it benefit them? 100%, but they need to be wanting to do it. So there comes back to worthy inquiry. Now, sometimes the worthy inquiry shows up as they come to you and they're like, Hannah, I'm so anxious. My anxiety is really bad. And, I'm seeing my naturopath. I'm trying to take some magnesium. And you might say, oh, there's something that's, probably really helped me that you could. And they might be like, oh my God, amazing. Tell me about it. I want to go to an intro talk. Or they'll be like, oh, no. I think I need to, I've got it, or I don't want to. And you can just sense whether they're, so sometimes it's not coming in, tell me about your meditation practice, or tell me about the pathway that you've gone down. It's more, coming through a physical or a mental or a stress element. But again, it needs to be, there's relevance. And some people come to that, some of those 8 people might come later, 3 years later, 5 years later, 9 years later, and say, I think that thing you kind of mentioned, are you still doing that? Oh, you are. Oh, I kind of want to know a little bit more about it. So it should never be forced. It should never be controlled, whereby you have to do this in order to, there's going to be parameters which support a particular practice or technique, which is, for example, a period of amount. The practice is the practice. It might require a certain amount of time. It might require a particular seated position. It might have instructions which are actually of benefit for that to work. Otherwise, you're not doing that practice, which is equally fine as well, but just don't either be doing it or not be doing it. You can't really half-ask the practice. So there'll be certain parameters, but it shouldn't then be like, oh, and now you can't also do all these other things. It might be offered to you, like this is, in certain settings, they may be more of a pathway that encourages a particular lifestyle element. But even then, that should spontaneously arise in you as a desire to experience what it would be like to experience that for a period of time, rather than it being a prerequisite for the practice.
Yeah, and I think that can be a real point of friction when they're like, well, yes, you can only have this deeper connection with yourself, but it's conditional on what I want you to do. The other thing I reckon, which is the reason why I kept looking, because it felt like I could remember a time as a child when that connection was so much more open and available, because you're just so natural in that space. And I think so much more, maybe you remember, maybe there's just less barriers or less stress to sensing that connection that you have with yourself. And so it's kind of felt like, in a way, finding my way back there.
It is. It's a return to a time where we're more connected, which can have been in childhood and past life, and also taking it deeper from wherever it was. So there is often an element of remembering. Sometimes people start to have, divine experiences or subtle experiences that they remember then at that moment that they already had that experience as a child, or it feels very familiar. I can't say why. They maybe wouldn't use the term or the context, or it must be because I've experienced this before, though I know I didn't in this lifetime, so therefore it had to be some other body life experience. They may not use those terms, but it just has a level of familiarity to it. So there is this desire to return to unity, even at the baseline experience of everything. The baseline level of existence is unity. So where is it all heading is ultimately towards more unity with self and with all the other aspects of self. So if we're not progressing in that direction, and progressing, there's still going to be elements of us where we get shitty and react and move into separation. But if we're not progressing in that direction, then it's not really working, is it? I mean, that's just a really easy litmus test. Are we feeling more unified? Unified with everything, not just our individual and 5 other people that we know's view on things and getting very exclusive and dogmatic, but more open to all things, to the perspective of others, to people holding perspectives or worldviews that don't match ours, and that all being okay. Why do we need to insist that someone has the same viewpoint as us? It's not required. Everyone is acting from their own state of consciousness. The more that we reach the ultimate point, the more unity there is, the more unity of experience that does start to show up. But still, each particular nervous system is going to have elements that trigger different levels of experience. Even from an Ayurvedic perspective, Ayurveda being a body of wisdom within the Vedas that really describes the ways to bring the body into alignment with nature, to experience bliss in the body. So there is an elemental makeup within each body. It's called a dosha. Different body types have different predominance of elemental makeup, different doshas. So you might be more fire dominant, a pitta dosha, which has predominantly fire and then a little bit of water, and you may be pitta dominant and then have a secondary dosha like vata or kapha. But someone who's more fire dominant, fire is clarity, vision, it's a lot more visual. So you might, for example, experience a lot more visuals in meditation. And then kapha, which is more earth dominant, earth with a little bit of water, kapha dosha, which may have a secondary dosha there, they tend to feel sensations more in meditation. And vata, which is air and space, of course, quite the type that gets ungrounded very easily, but also has very refined subtlety of perception. They may have a lot more thinking. There's a lot more movement in the mind, so they might have even busier meditations as a result of that. So we can see there is a spread of experience that exists even within different nervous systems, different doshas, different body types, which again, within Ayurveda explains the phenomenon where you're sleeping next to someone, one of you is really cold, wants the doona on, the duvet on. The other one is just hot and just insists on it not being on. Now, these are different doshas. There's pitta, fire dominant, and then more the cooler type vata. If you get a vata and pitta person together, it's going to be very hard to balance the
very difficult
room
with the
temperature, which is also why there's certain, different foods, different ways of eating, that the pitta person can eat a much bigger meal. Their digestion's really strong because the digestive fire is strong. And then vata is going to have air and space. It has a lot of sensitivity. There can be a lot of air in the system, and they're going to have a more sensitive digestive system. So again, enforcing what works for you on another doesn't really work when we have this deeper understanding.
I want to go a little bit back to the idea of reincarnation, because I think, like, for me, that's something, it's an idea I'm really comfortable with, and I sort of don't even question that that's just the thing that happens. I've had some experience of, seeing other lives and stuff like that. But then occasionally you strike someone who's like, you live once and then it's black and nothing else happens and everything ends.
Yeah.
And, how do you sort of explain, like, what is the point of having multiple lives? Why does this happen to a soul? And it's not in terms of wanting to convince someone that they need to think and feel a different way about it. I'm also interested, like, why do people feel that? Like, why would you prefer to feel like you have this one existence and then everything goes black and it ends, especially in terms of yourself, but also in terms of grieving someone that you might lose?
Yes, and grief is an interesting topic, or death. I think ultimately if they believe that, it's okay. It's fine.
Oh,
they'll see in the end which way it goes, That's fine. Let's see how it goes. We don't ultimately know anything for sure. I prefer that we don't believe anything. There shouldn't be any need for belief. There should just be direct experience. And sometimes there is intellectual context, which is partly what we tend to give in this tradition, is provide a bit of a framework so that when you have the experience, it's not meant to replace experience. It's not believe all of this and then you'll be fine. No, that doesn't work. We've seen that. Pure faith, people find that very challenging because of the lack of direct experience. But it's useful if experiences are, presented so that there's an opportunity, a range of experiences that you might have. They do that when you go in for surgery. Here's some things that could happen, this, and this, and we'll deal with it this way. It doesn't mean you're going to have any or all of those, but in this case, we're giving you some understanding, because what happens with spiritual experiences, the mind tends to discount it, would be the first thing. So you have a subtle experience, even your own intuition. So many women, particularly that I talk to, and even men, they've almost shut off in a lot of cases completely from that, because they're more moved into the more analytical brain. But you experience something and then you either ignore it, discount it. Oh no, it'll be much better if I'm not going back to get the umbrella. It's fine. I've looked at my highly inaccurate weather app this morning and it says it's not going to rain, but there was this feeling to go back. They're like, no, immediately discount, for example. Or a subtle experience that you're like, oh. And I hear this in lots of settings, retreats, group meditations, where people say, I saw this. I mean, I'm not sure if I just imagined it, but then because I know, and I've heard it so many times, that it's actually a consistent experience that does show up. That can be really useful just to validate your own experience, and then that opens you up to more experiences, because there's part of your brain and consciousness that can be closed off. So when we open up, we can open to expand and to receive more of that, reciprocity, let's say. So we don't need to really believe anything. We don't need to believe in reincarnation. Not relevant. If it feels like it aligns for you and it puts some pieces into place, then it has relevance. This lifetime is the most relevant lifetime. Chewing back over other lifetimes, it's just, little fantasy exploration. There's people that offer these things of past life, looking at this, looking at that, and, how many Cleopatras can we really have? You're always some grand figure. You're never just like, a beggar in the streets of Mumbai or something. So the experience, the reason why this lifetime is where you're having your level of experience and it's not dominant in another lifetime, is this is the moment that consciousness is focusing on, because this is the relevant moment. This is your most inspired, evolved moment. So that's why this lifetime is where you find your experience now. So therefore, nature itself is indicating it's not relevant to go back. There is an understanding that there's been a progression. There's been a progression of experience, and it just happens to have taken place over different lifetimes, which sometimes lands something for people when they are having past life memory, or there is some trauma where, I've seen examples of unexplained trauma, of very sensitive around the neck area and feel just like they've been strangled, but they have had no experience in this lifetime. Now, a likely explanation, some past life strangling experience happened, which can explain that. And that is what that book, Many Masters, Many Lives, talks about, was healing these kind of traumas that have no basis. If you can get to a point in this lifetime where the trauma started, great. But if you can't, then you're kind of stumped. So that, in that sense, it could be useful. But otherwise, just not relevant. Buddha describes when, in the moment of his enlightenment, his nirvana, where he saw what's called the hallway of mirrors, where he showed an experience in consciousness, which is a repeated experience that some other masters describe, of seeing all of the past lives leading back to a grasshopper and a blade of grass. And then as he looked back down that hallway, all of them evolved into Buddha, because his consciousness, by reviewing the past, by reflecting upon it, was immediately brought up to the level of consciousness that he was now in. So nature wanted to show him that, to give him a deeper understanding of the mechanics of life. And we may receive that kind of information, or you may not. It really comes down to relevance. And if someone's like, the body life goes black, okay. But then we come to death. And people regularly describe having, firstly, all the near-death experiences, which have been repeatedly described, of people that have had experiences out of the body. They're going towards the light, it feels very blissful, and then that tends to be the experience, and then they come back into the body and are able to remember and describe that experience. So there's many recorded examples of that now as well. And people being able to communicate with family members, having very clear visions or experiences of communicating with someone who's dropped the body, as we like to say in this tradition, because a little bit more accurate explanation of what actually happens, because the experience doesn't tend to end there. And we've got these examples of near death. There was some experience afterwards. This neuroscientist who, I think neurosurgeon maybe, I can't remember, who had experience after the brainstem, after he was pronounced dead. So experience continues beyond the body. So what we have is we're on this precipice now of people starting to have these experiences, have expanded consciousness where they can conceive of and understand what it means to have an experience beyond the body. Because when you meditate, you regularly have experience that doesn't involve just the body. As soon as you start meditating, your consciousness starts expanding. And something that people will frequently describe to me as well will be, my hands feel like they're getting really big. My head feels like it's massive. What's happening? I'll say, don't worry, your head's not getting any bigger. But the mind is modeling the consciousness expanding. So we're already experiencing from within the body, but also beyond the body. So to a meditator, the idea that there would be experience after body death just sits very naturally, because there's part of them that already has that knowledge through direct experience again. So being able to communicate or experience a soul level connection, a soul level communication when the body has dropped also indicates that there's some level of experience that happens after the body drops. Do we need to believe in that? No, but does it help us maybe put together some context around what that experience is and why it's happening and what it means? Then it has relevance.
What about so if you've had multiple lives, say someone close to you has dropped the body, and you're maybe having experience with their soul after they've dropped the body, but if they've had this library of lives, why are you experiencing, that one?
Why are they still connecting with you rather than other lifetimes?
Yeah,
and all the other connections.
Yeah, and all of those, all of those people that they've been, and if they've gone to a place where, I don't know, that's a big amalgamation of what they are in essence.
It's because the bond is really tight, and it's still tight closer to the time of death where they remember being in that body. That's their most recent experience. You remember the last 5 years more than you did when you were 5 years old. So if you drop the body right now, if you were to connect, it doesn't always happen, because sometimes the soul moves on and just graduates, which is a great blessing, and so we don't decry that in any way. But you're going to connect with those who are important to you now, not the friends you had when you were 5. You can't remember even who half of them are. So they were important at the time, but the relevance is the close bonds now. Also, the idea of soul families. And again, this may not be something you're at all interested in, but since the question was asked here, some of you might be, is that we will come together with souls again in the next lifetime, and there's a conglomeration of souls that we're working through karma with. There's a relevance. Sometimes it's just joy, and we want to walk the next lifetime together. People that don't believe in reincarnation at all, they say things like, I'll be together with you in this lifetime and the next, and, forever. It just comes out in those moments. So there's this kind of faint memory there, right? Which is, I just want to walk with you in different lifetimes. I don't kind of care what body I'm in or what body you're in or what that relationship looks like, but I want to walk with you in that lifetime. So some of the people that you may be, that soul is bonding with or still connecting with, or the reason you're connecting with them is because it's not just this lifetime. So there's a deeper connection that expands beyond just this lifetime as well. So some of the souls may be not in bodies and some still in bodies. And
is it like something like because you knew them as this, as this person in this lifetime, that's the relevant way to connect, because that's a way that you recognize and relate to one another?
Yeah, it's the most similar, recent body bag they've been in. So that's the way you'll perceive them in all likelihood.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just a felt sense, and you just feel the sense. So not everyone's visual. You're a very visual person, so you'll talk more about visual experiences. But for those that, again, this is a way people will deny subtlety of experience or even intuition, where it doesn't show up visually. And I described in episode 1 about how I heard a voice of instruction only at that one. There were 2 moments where I've heard the voice, but it's not regular for me. So if we're waiting for a voice again, which is another thing that people sometimes perceive, I'm supposed to hear the voice of God as a literal voice, whereas there's all these signals that nature, that God, universal self, is sending you all the time. So we can miss it if we're just waiting for one particular flavor. So again, it might not be visual, it might be a felt sense where you just feel their presence and it feels like them and it feels very pronounced and palpable to you. If we're limiting the way that our mind thinks about things, if we've got a limited viewpoint, then it can be confusing. It doesn't intersect or land nicely with all the other pieces of what we're experiencing. So things should be more open. If it's more expansive, if it allows for all of your experience is everything. What is your actual experience? And if you're receiving knowledge of some kind, practices of some kind, does it allow you to land all of that so that you can enjoy it and understand it and progress it?
There's a lot to think about there. I feel like we've strayed a long way from religion and stuff as well.
We really have.
Can people? Well, let's just touch back on it. Let's just pop back to Jesus Christ, just for lols. Because I like something that I get a little bit confused about is, and I think you went some way to answer this when you're talking about, worthy inquiry. So say you're brought into a church scenario as a child, like many of us were, and then they're like, hey, there's this guy, Jesus Christ, he's great, you should really like him, and we're going to talk about him a lot, and this should be the way that you feel about it. But you're like, well, I don't, to me, you've shown me a picture of a bearded man. Could be quite inaccurate. Why should I feel a particular way? Like I don't feel any resonance with this because you say that I should. So how can I have any kind of relationship that feels genuine for me to express in a certain way or feel a certain way about this figure?
You shouldn't have to progress with anything that you don't feel innately, genuinely, spontaneously inspired towards. Now, for some, that experience, Jesus Christ was a profound state of consciousness that the field remembers being. So that layer of consciousness is actually quite available to people. People feel when they call on Jesus Christ, when they connect with him being a layer of consciousness. Because again, coming back to what we just talked about, why can you experience that? Because he dropped the body and his consciousness was unified within the field as a unified state. It was an expanded state of consciousness that still exists after the body's gone. So even Jesus Christ, we have to have an understanding that there's some after experience there in order to have that connection. But because his consciousness was so unified and so infinite, it's readily available to people. So that explains the experience people have where they say, I called upon Jesus, I really felt him. They felt that grace, that bliss of what that layer of consciousness is. And so names are important. Sanskrit sayings, name and form are infinitely correlated. And so when we chant the name, it's invocative. And that is the mechanics of that. I'm chanting the name, I'm calling out to Jesus Christ. But not outside of yourself, enlivening that layer of awareness within your own consciousness. And so that's why there's this sometimes a flood of bliss that can come. The grace is there, feel touched by the grace, etc. That's the mechanics of what's happening there. It doesn't mean that you need to do that. It just may not be the path that's relevant for you, that's inspirational for you. You may also experience the divine in other forms in addition or separately to that, and all is fine. All forms of the divine are great. Let's experience them all. Let's not close off to what other divine experience we might be having.
So long as your chosen path, or like however you choose to access and connect with any kind of practice, whether that be going to church or whether that be sitting in meditation or all of it, it's relevant so long as it's actually giving something, like you're feeling a resonance there.
Yeah, if you feel like you're growing, you're expanding, that you're feeling more and more connected, more and more unity, more and more love, more and more access to clarity, inner wisdom, intuition, all of those things, then it's working for you. But equally, at any point in time, if you feel drawn to explore something, you should follow that, because it might hold something deeper for you, something greater, something complementary, something that enlivens another part of your experience. So rather than closing off or getting too dogmatic in one area, that may actually limit our evolution. So you're always gonna know inside of you, because there'll be some sense of, feel like it's something more, feel like I need something more. It may even be within the same tradition. I feel like I want an advanced practice now, an advanced mantra, or I want to go deeper, I want to go on retreat. Any feeling that you're having, particularly when you are releasing stress, if you're not releasing stress regularly, which is one of the primary functions, though not the only function of meditation, then some of your behaviors are going to be driven by fear and, wanting to get away from feelings that you're having. So then we can be driven down pathways that, the desire and the action has its basis rather in stress, rather than pure cognition, pure intuition. But that subtle feeling that's pulling you in a particular direction, particularly if you don't really know why, if it's very strong, like I need that coffee, I need that, I'm just so pulled into getting my, 12th Tim Tam, it's probably not coming from pure cognition. But when it has that sort of uplifting feeling on the heart, that subtlety, it can be very strong and clear in certain scenarios where you're just utterly clear on it, but it doesn't have that grippiness. Then it's always leading you in the most evolutionary direction, even if that's to lead you through a pathway to discover what isn't relevant for you. Also, because it's very useful to know what isn't relevant. It's useful to know what doesn't work. It's useful to know what had a level of experience but you didn't feel like continuing with that, because then when you do experience something that's really relevant, really useful, really working for you, then you're going to know for sure what that is. And I think the main thing is that people actually are connecting within. It's not really which way are you doing that. It's just as long as you are doing it. And then keep going till you find the best technology that gives you the deepest access in the easiest way possible that you can stay consistent with. Because sporadic practice, your one breathwork class a week isn't really probably going to give you good starting point, very nice experience, but it isn't going to give you that deep inner connection, release stress, which opens the channel for all of this to come through more strongly, unless you're regularly doing it. Because there's so much incoming stress. Life is so busy. If we're not regularly doing something daily, maybe even a couple of times a day, we're going to get clogged down with the stress that's going to just slow things down, limit access. And, we want to achieve our full potential. We are spiritual beings. That is just the basis of what we are. That essence is ultimately, even from a scientific perspective, is largely space. So what's happening in that space? What happens when we connect with that space? If we don't have that connection, then we're missing a huge aspect of our experience. And that part of our experience tends to be the one that brings the most balance, the most bliss, the most joy, the most meaning. It makes sense of all the other layers. If we're missing that, the other layers don't make sense. It can feel like life is just one big struggle, a battle, get through, make it through, battle through, pay some taxes, spend your life paying mortgage,
house,
die, maybe your kids aren't even there. What's all the point of it? So if we're not connected on the inside, this vertical relationship, very important, then our horizontal relationship is not going to bring as much joy, be smooth. It can be a lot of suffering. But when the vertical relationship is also there, then it all starts to come together. It all starts to make sense, because this is a huge part of our experience, this vertical relationship, which is the connection within, with essence, with our own spirit, our own soul. I talked to one friend of mine who's doesn't really have, he's like, I'm not spiritual. I was like, do you believe in a soul? He's like, oh yeah, I think I have a soul. It's like, okay, but then, we want to be connecting somehow with that soul then. And we can just mentally connect, but then we're going to still have stress in the way that's limiting the relationship, the feedback, the clear channel of communication. And so that, I feel, is a shame around why where we are now, where people just don't want to do anything spiritual. There's this time now as well, which is like there should be no gurus. I don't want to be with any guru because of all that's been done in the name of gurus as well, which has been, control and abuse and this egoic response where some of them, I think, probably were sharing something purely to begin with, and then one of those forces, fear, money, sex, power, feelings, impressions, has overtaken their pure pathway, their Dharma, and they've started to get into that role, has gone off track significantly and damaged people and gone away from really supporting people and supporting them to connect and gone into damaging them. But we can't really say, I don't ever want a guru, because guru is a function in nature. It means the removal of ignorance. We have to have removal of ignorance. Nature itself will do that for you by itself. When you're enlivening connection to inner guru, that connection where you correct your own intellect, where you see what the truth is innerly, and sometimes that will express through a teacher of all different forms. It could be through a partner, it could be through a child, it could be through someone who's giving you spiritual knowledge or guidance.
Could be through a podcast.
Could be through a podcast. Exactly. You're gaining something from that. If you're gaining and you still feel free and you're able to maintain free will and you feel like the teacher is not attached to what you do and what choices you make and is not trying to control that in any way, then there's probably some green flags there. We can't really do away with the whole function because it's a function of nature. What we want to do away with is being in spaces where we feel controlled, where we feel limited, where we feel like there's some power trip going on, some power dynamic. It can be very seductive because you may also at the same time be having genuine experience. The tool or technique or knowledge may not be incorrect, but then because someone's ego has overtaken that and they've got overruled by one of those forces, usually money, sex, power have been the primary ones that we've seen have led leaders, gurus, people astray, then obviously so much damage has gone, all of it gets thrown out, which then people are like, right, I don't want to do anything spiritual now, and they're missing. Part of them can even grieve that because they were gaining so much there, but every time they practice, it's now associated with trauma, which is where we don't want it to go. So it needs to be, everyone needs to have their own discernment, their own autonomy, or online all the time, and be following their own fine level of feeling, and then they can find those teachings, practices that support them wherever they're at and that are destined for them on that pathway, and maintain discernment all the time, and then it can be a very beautiful, expansive experience.
So for people who aren't feeling clear on their discernment, maybe they have a lack of trust in their ability to make a safe decision around these things, or maybe have had quite a traumatic experience with, someone who abused their authority or something like that. How can they keep themselves safe in that space? By learning to trust themselves and recognizing that when they were in that situation, they did have signals. Usually, even if it's a relationship where you've ignored the red flags.
They were there at the beginning.
Yes, they were.
So it's a really important process to go back, and that might be something that you do with a therapist, where you go back and explore, why did you ignore those? This is usually a trauma reason there in the beginning, some kind of trauma bond. And to recognize that your system is not faulty. Your system was working. The flags were there. You chose to ignore them because of some things, which may have been some of the things I talked about. It may be a trauma bond. It may be lack of self-trust. But when you can see that there, you can recognize that actually you can trust yourself. And then what you'll know is that because of the experience you've had, you are going to pay attention the next time those flags go off. And so to have a safe space to talk to someone about any red flags you're experiencing in any scenario, because sometimes then we can also have our alarm system go off, but the space is actually safe. And we just need to recognize that that is coming from the past trauma, and actually none of that is playing out here right now. So we need to be able to make that discernment. Sometimes we might need a therapist or a mentor to support us to see that in a safe way. But the system's always there. So that's where we can really trust and be guided very well.
So if you don't currently have some kind of entry point where you feel like you can have some guidance in developing a relationship and greater connection with the self, where would you start?
Try some things out. Just see, what is the thing that you heard about that you had a little spark of interest on? What's the thing that someone you know is practicing that they've said is really good? Like, it's good to have a personal recommendation from someone. And like, for example, Vedic meditation, the style that I teach, there's a free intro talk where you can go along and just listen and then see what that sparks for you. Does it spark a no? Does it spark a yes? Does it spark that feeling of pull? And if it's a no, then it's not relevant for you. And you can use that signal to allow you to explore different things. And I encourage you to try things out. I tried out a few things and I was like, until I found the thing that was most relevant and really worked for me and, has for many others. But explore. Exploration is fun. We don't have to know the answer.
And I guess you don't have to take it too seriously.
No.
Like the thing that I remember from that one Buddhist meeting that I went to was that they served like chocolate biscuits and a cup of tea at the end, and I thought, well,
lovely.
No, like that was great. It wasn't the reason that I would be coming back, but I was pleased about that. But and also, it was something that I did with a friend. We're like, should we just go and check it out?
Yeah, totally.
And that can be quite a fun element of exploration. Yeah.
Yeah, and that also brings me to talk about Sangha as well, which is the concept of, spiritual community. And I think there are lots of different types of communities. Sometimes people get put off by thinking that they need to dance around in white robes or something if they're going to be part of a spiritual community, or dress a particular way, or not eat meat, or whatever it might be. But connecting, it's conscious community is probably a better way to talk about it too. If you are interested in growing in that way and you're enjoying your practice and you're enjoying the knowledge, or you want more of it, or you want to connect with others that are that way inspired, because you might also have lots of other friends that aren't into it. And there's it's generally been reported within the Yoga Vedantic tradition that the Sangha is very important. Because it supports you on your path. It supports you to stay connected with your practice, because, like you said, you went with a friend and you have lots of medi-mates now as well, as we call them, who you enjoy going on retreat with and you travel with and meditate together, and you also have lots of other friends that don't meditate. But it's really supportive to find that community, and there's lots of ways to connect in that way as well. And that can be another valuable part of having a practice, a conscious pathway.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that I love so much about that community of people and the friends that I've made there is there's no bullshit chat. There's no small talk. There's, you can just get into the nitty gritty of things. You can, and you're so supportive of people in their crunchy moments. They don't need to show up in any particular way. They just can show up exactly as they are, and you can to them.
Yeah, I think the masks are all down. Yeah. On the last retreat that I hosted, one of the things that people said that they really enjoyed most was and actually a couple of the women said they felt like they'd never been in an environment like that, where they were totally accepted for who they were and they didn't have to show up in any particular way. And many of them were a little bit afraid to come on retreat. Like, what are the people going to be like? How will I be received? Will I get on with them? Is it going to be all weird? Those are all the kind of preconceptions we might have. But when you find the setting where people are doing a tool together, a practice together that really is creating unity, that's the evidence of it. It should show up like that, because what you're connecting, the basis on which you're connecting, are a range of people from early to mid-20s through to late 60s, of different walks of life, different experiences, different stage of life, is that different skin bags, different preferences, all is there, all is welcome. It doesn't really even matter. It starts to become ageless, timeless, preferenceless, because where you're connecting is with that resonance of that layer of being that's very lively in them, that baseline layer. that you're experiencing, they're experiencing. And so you're actually connecting on that, not on the fact that you both have this particular set of preferences, though that might get discovered along the way. But also, you know, I've seen retreats where the two that got on really well were the oldest and the youngest one, you know, which is surprising for both sometimes. And I love seeing that.
I think that's a beautiful place to finish, particularly seeing as there's a power tool in the background that we don't want joining in on this podcast.
Yeah, lots shared. Could talk for hours, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Georgia.
Beautiful.
I feel very unbound on religion and spirituality and how they intersect.
We've broken it down. See you next time.
See you next
on
time.
Unbound. Thanks for getting unbound with us today. We'd so appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave us a review and to share this episode with anyone who you think could benefit. It helps us to keep these conscious conversations flowing. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. See you next week.